Hey guys, Ryan Lutz here. Thanks for stopping by. Today I want to go over what kind of changes I do to my car when I go from a normal setup to a high bite setup. Whether I know that the track I'm going to might be sugared or molasses or whatever they put on it to really make it high grip, or if it's a track that starts out green and kind of loose and then throughout the weekend starts to groove in and maybe the temperatures are high. So just kind of the changes I go for that on my Kyosho MP10 TKI 3 Nitro Buggy and TKI 2 E-Buggy. So first things first, this past week I went to Shake and Bake RC Speedway in Piedmont, South Carolina, and knowing that they were going to sugar the track and that the traction was going to be higher and temperatures were going to be unseasonably warm, about 80 degrees, I preemptively in my E-Buggy went to 30-20-20 in my Diffs. Now that was with the standard 10-20 gears in all three Diffs. Now the TKI 3 Nitro Buggy comes with the 12-18 optional gears. They were optional. They come in the center of the Nitro Buggy. Now I feel like these 12-18 gears are excellent choice on your lower to mid grip at most, but they require a lot heavier diff oil to feel the same as what the 10-20s do. So I'm going to try to go over that with you. So my E-Buggy, I had the 10-20s, all three diffs, 30-20-20, same setup I ran at Chico, California for the Nationals, and that traction was high bite and good groove throughout the whole weekend. So I did that preemptively in the E-Buggy and put it out there, and it felt pretty good. So then the Nitro Buggy, I had my standard setup from my previous race, and the diffs were 7-20-3, but that 20 in the center was with the 12-18 gears, which make it feel a lot lighter. So it actually feels like 7 with the 10-20 gears. So I wanted to see what it would feel like. So I was running the new AKA Lutz tires. When I first got there, I started with the soft compound because it was about 60 degrees and there had been some rain, or not rain, but just the moisture dew coming up from the night. And they felt pretty good at first. And then as the day progressed, the sun came out, dried the track, a little bit of a groove developed, and then the grip really started to come up. I went to the medium long wear compound for the Lutz tires. And that is what I ended up running for the rest of the weekend. So tire-wise, you definitely want to go harder tire when the grip comes up. It'll make the car easier to drive. It won't balloon the tires as much. You'll be able to drive it harder without getting the car upset. So back to the diffs, E-Buggy felt pretty good out there, so I knew I was going to have to make those changes to the Nitro, but I kind of wanted to see what they felt like at first. So I went out there with the Nitro, and sure enough, I was diffing out a bit. The car would get kind of walky, I call it, coming onto the straightaways. What I mean by that is you come onto the straight, say you're turning, come onto the straight, and the diffs are too light, they'll start diffing out because it's transferring a lot more weight. And the car kind of dips to one side, the other end diffs out, and then it goes back the other way, and you just kind of constant back and forth. I call it walking down the straightaway. And that loses time, loses pace, loses your consistency. So you want to go heavier diffs, especially in the rear. That'll help kind of push it, come out of the corners smoother. But first thing I did was went heavier in the front. So I went to 30, just knowing my E-Buggy was good, I was going to jump to that. 30 in the front, and just tried that. So I had 30, 20, 3. Again, the 20 in the center was with the 12-18s. The 30 at the front, that seemed to give me a little bit more pull through the corners. The front didn't diff out as bad, and I knew I was on the right direction. Next, I went and did the rear. So I went to the 20 in the rear. This helped me come out of the straightaways smoother, and the car tracked better. So now the biggest thing I noticed was kind of in that mid corner, or the sweeping corners, and that's kind of where the center came in. So that 20 in the center, it feels more like 7 in your hand, and what it does is it diffs out easier to the front because it's too light for the condition. And so when I had that action in the corner, so you're kind of loading the car in a corner, and then get the weight transfer to the rear, and then it diffs out the front and gives up energy. And the heavier you go in the center, it'll make it more four-wheel drive, and I'll have less of that effect. But because I had that effect, it was kind of erratic through the corners. It wasn't smooth, I couldn't push it hard, and so I knew I needed to go up in the center. So I wanted to keep the 12-18s in the center to see if I can go high enough to make it still feel good with those. So I went all the way up to 50. That's the highest that I had, and it still had that same effect. It was better, but it still, through the corners, just wasn't as smooth as I knew it could be, and wasn't as smooth as my E-Buggy was with the 20,000 with the 10-20 gears. So what I want to demonstrate for you is actually the difference. We can actually, LutzRC has a diff analyzer that can actually tell you what the diff is. You can get at least a number for it. So this diff had the 50,000. This is basically the same thing I had in the center. It's a different diff, but it's the 1218s with 50,000. And you'll be able to see here. See if I can get the number oriented properly for you. So we're in the 640 range, 630 as it starts to kind of warm up and get any air bubbles in there moved around. So about 630, and that's with 50,000 of the 1218s. So I went to 20,000 with the 1020s. And you can see we're in the, as it gets going, mid 700s. So much thicker diff, even though it's much thinner oil. So that's much of a difference the internal gearing can make as well on your car. That's why some cars run heavier sounding diff fluids than others, or as our case is, we have two different internal gear options. We have the 1020s, and then we have the 1218s, which kind of have a smaller but thicker spider gear, and that it makes a huge difference in the feel. So you got to really watch out for that. I do feel that on the higher grip tracks, you're going to really want to use the 1020s. So once I put the 20,000 in the center and the 1020s, I had the balance that I needed diff-wise. The next thing I wanted to change was shock oils. So I was still pretty light from my previous race. The previous race was around 50 degrees. This race was up to 80. And so I was starting to slap and off the jumps. And then the car also was just very quick in its movements. All the suspension movements were very quick rebounds, quick compressions. And that's just your oil's too thin. So what I did, I went up about 150 CST in the front and 150 in the rear as well. And that just kind of slows everything down. That'll make the car easier to drive on the higher bite. It won't have such quick movements, and by slowing it all down, it just makes that easier. Next was sway bars. So same thing, I was still having the effect where I was going into corners and maybe it was this diving too much or sitting too much to the rear. I'm going through a corner, turning left, and just dives too much to the rear. So I want to go up in sway bars to try to keep the car a little flatter when it kind of squatted down. And so I went from 2.2, 2.4 up to 2.4, 2.6. And so that kind of solved my issue with the shocks and the sway bars. And then one of the primary last things that I changed was my biggest issue was going down the front straightaway. And what would happen, we had a 90-degree right-hander. It was a fast sweeper. And we had to get on the brakes a little bit to slow it down and then kind of carry your momentum as fast as you could into that corner. And my front would really dive on that front end. So what I did is I lowered my link on the front tower here. So lowering the link on your tower raises your roll center. So that supported the front more and it kept my car flatter as I went through the sweeper. And that allowed me to carry, again, more corner speed and stay on the throttle more. And then finally, if you've seen my videos on what you can do with foams on your tires, I taped my foams on my tires, and that also allowed me to drive the car harder. The foam wasn't shifting the car. I did it front and rear because the grip was pretty high, and that was another thing that helped make the car easier to drive. So I did a clinic out there on Friday nights, and a lot of people were asking me about the diffs, and I told them I was running 30-20-20, on the e-buggy, and they were really like, wow, that sounds so high. And I'm watching them on the track and they're running their standard 7.75, 7.73, somewhere in that range. And you can see they don't drive as hard as I do. So if you don't drive as hard, you can get away with it. But people also want to know how to go faster. You can't drive that soft of a diff setup faster because the car gets upset and it'll dive too much. It'll balloon tires. You're losing energy when it's doing that. It won't come up on the straightaway smoothly. So by actually going heavier in your diffs, it allows you to carry more corner speed. So that's like the name of the game. We can all go at the same speed down the straightaway. We all have the same electronics, same engines that all make the same power basically. But the big difference is carrying that corner speed, carrying that momentum. And so, especially on a high grip track, the thicker diff oils can really help you do that, along with just setting your car up to be able to drive the car harder and do what the track will allow it to do. So I hope that was helpful for you guys for setting your car up a little bit more on a high bite track. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I appreciate any share or likes that you could give. And we will see you next time. Have a great week. Bye-bye.